Well, let's talk about this more now with Ross Feingold. He is a former Asia chairman for Republicans Abroad and joins us now from Taipei. Thanks very much for being with us. So what's happened in Minneapolis has been a political disaster for the Trump administration. What do you make of its change in tone over the last 24 hours? And is that a recognition that it was losing the narrative on events in Minneapolis?
Certainly, the Trump administration is facing some very tough questions about how it's gone about with its immigration operations. And yeah, there seems to be some softening of tone from the White House spokesperson and even President Trump himself, specifically after his phone call with Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, who's a Democrat and somebody that Trump has harshly criticized in the past. But I think we should be cautious about looking at events in the last few hours as signifying a major change in approach by the Trump administration. Keeping in mind that Trump campaigned on immigration enforcement in 2024 is one of the reasons why he was elected. And his supporters, broadly speaking, do support a robust effort to arrest and to deport people who are in the country illegally. So in the coming weeks and months, is the Trump administration going to significantly change its policy? I don't think so. I think we're going to continue to see President Trump expecting the relevant agencies to continue to deploy and continue to detain and deport people who are in the country illegally.
You mentioned that this was a key issue that got President Trump elected, and as you rightly say, many of his core supporters support this. But as with any election, it was the swing voters, the independent voters that got him over the line, and many of them, if the polls are to be believed, are repelled by what they've seen daily on the news, these images of these immigration agents seemingly acting with impunity, rounding up people on the streets. Many of them don't even look like police. They're wearing masks and they're heavily armed. I mean, many people say they look like bandits. And we've seen the pictures of the way they handle people. Does this kind of violent crackdown serve any real purpose?
Well, again, it does achieve the goal. President Trump has demanded that the relevant agencies meet some very significant targets for the number of people that they detain every day and eventually deport. And it's been widely reported, in fact, that President Trump was unhappy with the lack of progress, which results in the agencies really making an even greater effort to do this. And certainly the polls indicate that swing voters have become disillusioned with President Trump. They might have some buyer's remorse. They did support him in the 2024 election. But also, an important thing to keep in mind here is that the number of districts in the House that are competitive, or the number of seats in the Senate that are competitive in this November's election, are very, very small. So ultimately, that means that both sides, the Democrats and the Republicans, are probably going to focus on their base. And yes, they might have to adjust their message in those swing districts or in the few Senate seats that might be competitive. But is either side going to greatly depart from their core message? Probably not. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if President Trump and the Republicans actually start to dig in and say that this is an important part of who we are and why we were elected, and we're going to continue with the enforcement measures.
But I was asking you specifically about these enforcement measures, the very heavy-handed tactics of rounding people up. In many cases, some of them are actually American citizens, but because they don't look "quote unquote" American, they end up being dragged into this. Is that the way that the U.S. wants to project itself?
Yeah, that's a very fair criticism. We're as Americans, we're not used to seeing that. We're not used to seeing, especially federal authorities on the streets of our cities conducting these kinds of operations. And I think President Trump is conscious of that, and that's probably why we've seen some movement in the last few hours with the messaging. And frankly, I would expect behind the scenes, President Trump is probably asking some very difficult questions to Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem and other personnel. Is that going to change their actual posture on the street, including the way they dress and how they deploy? I'm not optimistic. I do think President Trump is going to continue to pursue the current policy broadly unchanged.
Ross Feingold, thanks very much for being with us.